Somewhere beneath a maximum security prison in Ohio, there's a room that doesn't exist on any blueprint. No cameras, no guards, just concrete walls stained with 2 decades of secrets and a steel cage in the center that the inmates call the pit. Every new inmate who steps into this prison faces the same welcome. Not a handshake, not a warning, a fight. Tonight, the man they shoved into that cage was quiet, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't even raise his eyes. They thought his silence was fear. They thought his stillness meant he'd break in 30 seconds. They were wrong. In 5 minutes, this cage would hold a secret that would make the most dangerous men in this prison never want to see him fight again. 6 months earlier, Marcus Carter was nobody special. That's exactly how he liked it. At 51 years old, Marcus pushed a mop bucket through the halls of Jefferson Middle School in Cleveland, Ohio, 5 nights a week. The kids called him Mr. Marcus. The teachers barely noticed him at all. He preferred it that way. Invisible men don't get hurt. Invisible men don't hurt anyone else. He lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. No television, no visitors, just a Bible on the nightstand, a single photograph in a cracked frame, and a locked box in his closet that hadn't been opened in 12 years. That photograph was of his daughter, Renee, and the reason Marcus Carter lived like a ghost had everything to do with a promise he made at her grave. Because Marcus wasn't always a janitor. 15 years earlier, Marcus Iron Carter was the heavyweight champion of the Midwest Circuit. Undefeated. 26 wins, 22 by knockout. Reporters called him a freight train with a jab. He was 3 fights away from a world title shot. Then came the fight against Dante Reyes. A fight Marcus didn't want, and a rematch he was pressured into by a manager chasing a bigger paycheck. Reyes had a heart condition nobody disclosed. Nobody except Marcus knew, and even he only found out after. Dante Reyes never woke up. He left behind a wife and 2 sons. Marcus retired that night. He gave away his championship belt. He never threw another punch in anger again. Not in the ring, not in the street, not anywhere. He testified at Reyes's insurance hearing. He sent money to the widow every month for the rest of his life, anonymously, through a lawyer who never knew why. That was the man walking home on the night everything changed. A man who had already buried the fighter inside him. A man who thought his violence was behind him forever. He was wrong about that too, but not in the way you'd expect. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday when Marcus passed the Fresh Stop convenience store on 14th and Vine, the same store he passed every single night on his walk home. Inside, 17-year-old Jamal Whitfield was working his first job, closing alone, when a man in a ski mask walked in with a gun demanding to register. Marcus saw a boy the same age his daughter would have been, staring down the barrel of a gun. He didn't think. He acted. Marcus disarmed the robber in less than 4 seconds. Old instincts. From a life he thought he'd buried. He pinned the man to the floor and held him there until police arrived. Jamal was safe. The gun never touched Marcus's hands except to throw it across the room. This should be where the story ends. A hero, a grateful town, a boy who got to go home to his mother. Instead, it was where Marcus Carter's nightmare began. The robber's name was Curtis Doyle, and Curtis Doyle had one advantage Marcus didn't: a cousin on the local police force and a fast practice lie. That man attacked me. I was just walking in to buy cigarettes. Jumped me for no reason. Ask the kid. He'll tell you, that man's crazy. Jamal was too shaken to speak. Traumatized teenagers rarely give clean statements in the first 10 minutes after a gun goes off near their face. The store's security camera had been broken for 3 weeks. A maintenance request the owner never filed. And Curtis's cousin made sure the initial police report favored his family's version of events. Marcus never raised his voice, never resisted. He simply said, "I understand. I'll come with you. Just take care of that boy. He's had a scare tonight." The trial took 8 months. Marcus's public defender was overworked and underprepared. Curtis's family hired a private investigator who dug up Marcus's boxing past and painted him to the jury not as a retired champion who'd renounced violence, but as a man with, quote, a documented history of dangerous physical aggression. Nobody mentioned the 12 years of silence. Nobody mentioned the anonymous checks to a grieving widow. Nobody mentioned that Marcus hadn't thrown a punch in over a decade until the night he saved a stranger's son. The jury convicted Marcus Carter of aggravated assault. 7 years in, Blackridge Correctional Facility. Jamal Whitfield, the boy he saved, wasn't in the courtroom. That day, his mother had pulled him out of state, terrified of retaliation from Curtis's family. He never got the chance to tell his side. Marcus didn't cry, didn't argue, didn't ask for mercy. He simply whispered something to himself as they led him away. I already died once, Renee. This is just the body catching up. Blackridge Correctional Facility had a reputation long before Marcus arrived, overcrowded, understaffed, and beneath its surface, an entire economy that had nothing to do with the guards. The prison was run, in practice, by a man named Dominic Priest Wallace, not because he held a title, but because he controlled the one thing every inmate wanted, the pit. Every 3 weeks, in an unused boiler room, 2 guards were paid to. Forget about inmates gathered to bet cigarettes, commissary credit, and favors on fights between prisoners. And every new arrival at Blackridge faced the same unwritten law. New meat always fights first week. Ain't optional, friend. You fight. Priest champion, or priest makes your next 7 years feel like 70. Marcus said nothing. He'd learned that lesson long before prison, that silence protects you better than words ever could. But silence, in a place like Blackridge, is often mistaken for weakness. Priest Wallace had run the pit for 6 years. Nobody had ever refused a fight and walked away whole. He watched the new inmate, the quiet one, the janitor, the file called him, and made a decision that would define everything that followed. Old man thinks he's better than us. We'll see how humble he is with a busted jaw. 3 nights after Marcus arrived, they came for him. Priest wants you downstairs. Now, tell Priest I'm not interested in fighting anyone. I don't fight. Not anymore. That ain't a request, old man. Marcus made a choice in that hallway that most men in his position never would. He decided not to fight back. Not out of fear, but out of a promise made. 12 years earlier, at a graveside to a daughter who never got to grow old. Renee Carter died of a rare heart complication at 9 years old. The same year Dante Reyes died in the ring. 2 deaths, 6 months apart, that broke something in Marcus that never fully healed. At her grave, he made a vow. I took a man's life doing the thing I loved most. I won't take another. Not ever again. Not even to protect myself. I promise you that. Baby girl. That vow was about to be tested in the worst possible place. A cage. Surrounded by men who had never once been shown mercy and had no intention of showing any either. The pit wasn't just a fight. It was theater. A ritual designed to strip new inmates of whatever dignity they walked in with. Priest didn't send his best fighter. He sent Bishop, a young man with something to prove and nothing left to lose, doing 18 years for a robbery gone wrong. Bishop needed this win to earn Priest's protection. He needed it badly. Marcus stood in the center of the cage and did something that confused everyone watching. He lowered his hands. What, you too good to fight me, old man? I'm not going to fight you, son. Whatever happens here, that's on you, not me. The crowd took his words as cowardice. Bishop took them as an insult. What none of them understood was that Marcus had made this same choice once before, years ago, and had spent every day since living with the cost of not making it sooner. The first punch landed clean across Marcus's jaw. He absorbed it, didn't flinch away, didn't raise a hand to block the second one either. For the next 4 minutes, Marcus Carter did something that no man in that room had ever witnessed. He let himself be hit. Again and again. Bishop threw everything he had. Hooks, uppercuts, a knee to the ribs that dropped Marcus to one knee. And still, he didn't swing back. The crowd's jeering slowly turned into something quieter. Confusion. A few men in the back stopped cheering altogether. There's a particular kind of silence that spreads through a crowd when they realize they're not watching a coward. They're watching a man endure something on purpose. Even Bishop began to feel it. Something about beating a man who wouldn't defend himself started to feel less like winning and more like something else. Entirely. Fight back. Why wouldn't you fight back? Because I promised somebody I never would again. That's when Priest, sensing his fighter losing the crowd, losing the fight's entertainment value, and worse, losing his own authority in front of every inmate, watching, made the decision that would change everything. Bishop reached down and pulled a shiv from his sock, a 6-inch piece of sharpened steel, smuggled in weeks earlier for exactly this kind of moment when a fight needed to end fast and decisively. There's an unspoken code, even in the pit. Fists only. Bishop broke it in front of 40 witnesses because Priest needed a win and Bishop needed to keep breathing. After the fight, for 12 years, Marcus Carter had let every insult, every provocation, every reason to fight pass through him like water. But blade aimed at his chest wasn't an insult. It was a threat to the only thing he had left to protect, his life and the promise he'd need to survive to keep honoring. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. 15 years of championship muscle memory, buried under a decade of restraint, came back all at once. Not in rage, but in pure, controlled necessity. One disarm, one punch. That's all it took. Bishop was out cold before. His body even finished falling. 5 minutes. That's all it took from the moment the cage door closed to the moment it ended. 4 minutes of a man refusing to fight, and 11 seconds of a man remembering exactly who he used to be. Marcus didn't celebrate. He didn't even look at the crowd. He knelt down beside the young man he'd just knocked out and checked to make sure he was still breathing, the same instinct that had gotten him thrown into prison in the first place. It was Willis who said it first, an old man who'd been locked up long enough to remember a different world, a world with televisions and pay-per-view boxing, matches, and a heavyweight champion who vanished overnight. Iron Carter. That's Iron Carter. The name spread through the room in whispers. Iron Carter, the undefeated heavyweight who retired at the peak of his career after a fight that ended a man's life. The champion who disappeared from the sport entirely and was never heard from again. Priest Wallace had built 6 years of power on the idea that nobody in Blackridge could challenge him. He had just watched a man who never wanted a fight take apart his best enforcer in 11 seconds, without a single ounce of malice, and while bleeding from a fight he never wanted in the first place. I didn't want this. I still don't. Tell your men. Nobody else needs to test that. Marcus walked out of the pit that night the same way he walked in. Quiet, unassuming, carrying no pride in what had just happened. But everything in that prison had changed. Word of what happened in the pit spread through Blackridge faster than any contraband ever had. But it didn't spread as a story about a dangerous man. It spread as a story about a man who tried everything not to be dangerous and only became so when there was no other choice. Bishop found Marcus a week later, once the swelling in his jaw had gone down enough to speak clearly. Why'd you let me hit you like that? For minutes. You could have ended it in 10 seconds. Because you needed a swing, son. Some men gotta get it out of their system before they can hear anything you say. I figure maybe if you hit me enough, you'd tire yourself out enough to actually listen after. Priest would have killed me if I lost clean. Made me pull that knife. Told me it was the only way. I know. That's why I'm not angry at you. Man in a cage does what the man outside the cage tells him to. Question is whether you keep doing that for the rest of your life, or whether you find a way out of the cage Priest built inside your head too. That conversation planted something in Bishop that would take years to fully grow, but it started that day in a prison cafeteria with a man who had every reason to hate him and chose forgiveness instead. While Marcus served his sentence with quiet dignity, something was happening 200 miles away that he knew nothing about. Jamal Whitfield had never stopped thinking about the man who saved his life and paid for it with his freedom. When he turned 18, free from his mother's fear of retaliation, he walked into a legal aid office and told them everything. He didn't do anything wrong. That man saved my life, and I let him go to prison because I was 17 and scared, and nobody asked me the right questions. Until it was too late. Patricia Reyes had built her career on cases exactly like this one. Convictions built on rushed statements and convenient lies. She reopened the investigation. She found a store owner who'd never filed the camera repair request, still on record. She found 2 other witnesses on the street that night who'd never been properly interviewed. And most damning of all, she found that Curtis Doyle had been arrested 18 months later for an almost identical robbery, this time caught on working camera footage that made his methods unmistakable. It took another year of appeals, but the truth eventually did what the truth usually does when enough people refuse to let it stay buried. It surfaced in light of newly discovered evidence and the sworn testimony of the original victim. This court vacates the conviction of Marcus Carter, effective immediately. Marcus Carter walked out of Black Ridge Correctional Facility on a gray Tuesday morning, wearing the same clothes he'd been arrested in 2.5 years too small for the man he'd become inside those walls. And waiting for him at the gate was the boy, now a young man he'd risked everything for on a Tuesday night that changed both of their lives forever. I am sorry. I should have said something sooner. I should have. You were 17 with a gun in your face. You don't owe me an apology. You showed up. That's more than a lot of people ever do. Marcus used the settlement from his wrongful conviction lawsuit to open something he never thought he'd touch again in his lifetime, a boxing gym. But this one wasn't built for championships. It was built for kids like Jamal and men like Bishop who needed somewhere to put everything they were carrying before it put them somewhere they couldn't come back from. Bishop was released 14 months after Marcus, having testified against Priest Wallace's operation in exchange for a reduced sentence. Testimony that finally shut down the pit for good. Marcus was the first person he called when he walked out. Marcus gave him a job before he even asked for one. Hey, look at me. Nobody's going to hurt you. Here, this is a place where you learn to protect yourself, not where you learn to hurt other people. Ask Mr. Marcus. He'll tell you the difference took him his whole life to learn, and he's still learning it. Marcus Carter never fought professionally again. He never needed to. He'd already won the only fight that ever really mattered, the one against becoming a man who hurt people, even after the world gave him every reason to. There's a kind of strength that has nothing to do with how hard you can hit. It's the strength to stand in a cage, absorb every blow the world throws at you, and still choose not to become the thing that hurt you. Marcus Carter spent 5 minutes in an underground cage that no one will ever forget. But he spent 12 years before that, and every year after, proving that the real fight was never about who could throw the hardest punch. It was about who could carry the most pain and still choose gentleness on the other side of it. Redemption isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself in a cage full of screaming men. Sometimes it's just a quiet man refusing to raise his fists until the one moment he absolutely has to, and even then, choosing to stop the second it's over.